the meeting for the Madawana Aberdeen Regional Board of Education meeting to order. In New Jersey, time is 7:02. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law is enacted to ensure the right of the public to an advance notice of and to attend the meetings of the public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or agreed upon. In accordance with the provision of this Act, the Madawana Aberdeen Regional School District Board of Education advertised this meeting on February 7th, 2018 in the Asbury Park Press and Star Ledger. This notice was sent to municipal clerks of the Borough of Madawana and Township of Aberdeen and the Madawana Aberdeen Joint Free Public Library. The notice was also placed on the website. If we can stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can you take roll call, Mr. Ferrer?
Yes, good evening. Mr. Ahern?
Here.
Mr. Graham?
Here.
Dr. Lane?
Here.
Mr. Monson?
Here.
Ms. Moore?
Here.
Ms. Nabi? Ms. Wellen?
Here.
Ms. Esposito?
Here.
Ms. Friedman?
Here.
Thank you.
And now I will turn it over to Dr. Micah for the superintendent's report.
Good evening, everyone. At this time, I will call up Mr. Ferreira to the podium to discuss the budget appropriations for the 2019-20 school year.
Good evening. My name is Alex Ferrer. I'm here to present the what is the third part of a four-part budget for 1920. So we start out typically with the budget process in December after we kind of conclude our audit process. At that point, we kind of know what your fund balance is, your surplus, and that kind of stuff. And that leads us into what I like to do is just give the board and the community kind of an opportunity to kind of just get some framework of how that all fits in with a short terminology presentation. Then at the last meeting, I talked about the revenues. At the time, we hadn't received our state aid yet. So I'll touch on it a little bit tonight at the conclusion of the presentation. But then this part right here, which is part 3, talks about the appropriations. And this basically is kind of a framework of what we expect to spend our dollars on. So from that standpoint, the main focus still centers around the strategic plan, maintaining the programs that we have in the district, and with the opportunity to kind of look at some of the analysis and some of the long-term planning. So as we kind of get going, the way that I've kind of broken this out, similar to last year, so we'll kind of have a pie chart, show kind of what the budget composition looks like, where the dollars are going, then kind of go take a slight step back about how the process kind of evolves through the administration, move on to the specifics about the details of the appropriations, and then planning ahead. So in terms of budget composition, similar to last year, this is, if you have $1, this is how many cents get assigned to each of the things. So this pie chart right here kind of is broken down by what in the chart of accounts is referred to as the object code. And all that does is just give folks an opportunity to kind of look at this at one of the most basic levels of where dollars are going. As you can see, almost 80% of our dollars goes towards salaries and employee benefits. And what I usually tell people is to say, that's not necessarily uncommon. We're in the business of educating kids. We're in the service industry. So consequently, salaries and benefits is going to be the majority of the thing, of where the dollars are spent. In terms of professional services, those are examples. So I'll just go quickly around the clock type of thing. Professional services are examples like C&I bringing in professionals to do professional development, that kind of thing. Property and equipment is somewhat specific to purchasing of equipment for technology or transportation, as well as some property leases that we might have kind of still out there, but they're minimal in terms of those things. Other services is what the it's object code 500, and this has a tendency to be just kind of an all-inclusive service line. Supplies, 4.1%. Those are, your consumables, and then other 0.7%. That's going to be things like registration fees, membership dues, that kind of thing. So for the most part, like I said, as it compares to last year, the numbers are comparable in terms of where we're spending our dollars. And for the foreseeable future, this is kind of the picture that we're kind of looking at. So in terms of process, first of all, we start off with kind of the needs assessment. And this needs assessment starts out at the building-based level. So the principals are asked to talk to their own staff, their committees at the building-based level, and come to us with kind of I don't want to use the word wish list, but a kind of an idea of where you want to kind of put their initiatives. In addition to that, each principal is given an allocation which is on a per pupil basis, and that per pupil basis is meant to kind of be utilized for the purposes of specific building-based initiatives. So if, for example, Ms. Perez were to say, okay, we're going to start a new program at Ravine Drive for special ed purposes, that wouldn't necessarily be taken out of the building-based allocation, it would come out of special services. So for the most part, anything that happens during the course of the building-based, during the day is building-based. So at that point, then needs assessment is, we have individual meetings with each principal. They relay that information over to us. Then we sit down as an administrative team and as a cabinet team to kind of go into further detail about how we want to kind of be strategic about the plan and how do we put better use to those dollars. And it gets to this point tonight. In terms of the review of strategic plan, I know that we're kind of at the latter stages of the existing strategic plan, and over the next year or so, we're going to kind of get going with a new one. This is the opportunity for us to kind of get the community's input on what the community values, and consequently, that should be kind of the framework that we use to kind of develop future budgets in terms of how and where we want to put those initiatives. And then in terms of strategy, this kind of talks a little bit about kind of what our risk assessment is, right? So what I mean by that is from a program standpoint, unlike the revenue standpoint where you can kind of be a little more aggressive or conservative with reference to how you estimate revenues. And there's some risk to that, like I talked about last time. With reference to the appropriations, it's a lot more black and white. And what I mean by that is that there are certain non-discretionary items that we need to budget for. Items like salaries, benefits, property casualty insurance, workers' comp, that kind of stuff. And then there's this discretionary stuff. And those are the things that we try to capture as much as possible and stretch those dollars as much as possible to offer students as much as possible in the classroom. And in terms of both curricular and extracurricular kind of initiatives. So as we kind of talk about, continue to talk about process, one of the things that I think is, important to kind of assess is how do we compare within our certain groups. So what you see there is two specific groups. One of them is statewide, so that's an average of every single district in the state. And then the second group, the middle group, is K-12 group with 3,501 students or more. And that's the group that we fall into. So there's a K-12 under 3,500, under, I believe, 1,000, and then consequently, I believe, under 500. So the state breaks up the K-12 groups for the purposes of comparison into groups by enrollment. So as you can see there, for the most part, we're on par with what both our K-12 group looks like in terms of ratios, as well as statewide. The kind of catch-22 with all this is that So if you happen to be kind of someone that's, fiscally conservative, obviously you want to have those ratios be as high as possible, right? Which means that, you're stretching your dollars as much as possible. If you happen to be a parent in the district, you probably want those ratios as low as possible, right? Student to teacher ratio, administrator to teacher ratio, and that kind of thing. So for the most part, I think we fare pretty well. With, the catch is that as we kind of progress over the next few years and kind of take into consideration what's going to happen with state aid and any other kind of revenues that are out of our control, those numbers might get impacted. So it's important for us to kind of have an idea that for the most part right now we're on par, but it doesn't take much to kind of deviate it one way or the other. So appropriations broken by program. So just to kind of break down the chart of accounts a little bit more. So the way that it works is that the state gives us a uniform chart of accounts that every district needs to use, every public school district needs to use, and I think now the private school districts are also required to, which is basically fund, and we're talking about Fund 10, which is our operating fund, program, which basically breaks up into these categories that you see there, and then you have function, which is the next slide, and object, which is that pie chart that I mentioned right at the beginning for the purposes of comparison. So basically what we see here is that for the most part, where we're spending our dollars is exactly where we thought we would be, meaning in terms of support, and those supports are going to be kind of your aid programs, transportation, technology, even maintenance and that kind of thing. Elementary, secondary, that includes all the kids from pre-K to 12, and we see a slight increase there as well. Special services is dipping a little bit, and that's as a result, of the work that Ms. Perez is doing with the child study team to try to kind of maximize and the programs that we have available to our kids. And other instructional, this is going to be your extracurriculars, after school type of program, like the tutoring programs that we have, athletics, and advisors. So for the most part, that's staying fairly flat as well. So in terms of appropriations by function, like I said, that's the third section of that chart of accounts that the state requires us to do. So to break up specifically the support function, which the major dollars here is the instructional. It's the 100 function. So breaking up the 200, just for the purposes of comparison, we basically have, where the dollars are spent in support students. It's going to be your 200s, which is, for example, aides, classroom aides, that kind of thing. Instructional staff. General administration is going to be kind of central office, superintendent. School administration is going to be building-based. Central services is going to be, legal and other kind of central items that are required district-wide. 252s, which are going to be your information technology. That's seeing a slight increase as well. Facility operations, this number is going down not as a result of our unwillingness to support the facilities operation, but more about kind of trying to defer some of those funds to the classroom. Once again, like we talked about before, with reference to the revenue portion of it, but also a situation where we're doing less capital projects. So as a result of doing less capital projects, we have less facilities costs. Transportation, that takes into consideration some of the changes that are going to be proposed today as part of the transportation policy and offering a couple more routes in anticipation of how that policy may play out. And just a quick note on that, I asked Ms. Kaiser to kind of run a couple of scenarios that will be shared with the board committee with reference to policy in between the first reading and the second reading, so we can make any adjustments as necessary. Excuse me. And then other support services is kind of like an all-in-one type of approach with reference to that. So other support services are going to be excuse me, anything outside of the ones listed. So planning ahead. So the current year, and this is the kind of the question that we get all the time around this time, we're kind of coming down the final stretch of the 18-19 budget. People will turn to me and say, okay, Alex, where do you see us kind of landing? And what they mean by that is, okay, are we going to have a surplus? We're not going to have a surplus. Are we able to deposit money into the reserve accounts? And so from this standpoint, as we kind of look at it right now, with a couple of asterisks behind the scenes, including the MRA settlement that might still come out, and not knowing what the final kind of numbers are going to be for health benefits just yet. For the most part, I think we are going to be able to replenish some, if not all, of the amount of money that we took out of the reserve accounts this year, which is something that I think is important as we kind of look ahead at some of the initiatives that are coming down the line, including replacing the track, replacing the turf field, and those kinds of things. In addition to that, you have the normal kind of boiler work, roof work, leftover projects coming out of the referendum that we just approved. This summer is going to be year 3 of that. So it's important for us to kind of keep that in mind, that the reserve accounts are there for that purpose. And if we're withdrawing from them on a consistent basis year over year, then we need to make sure that we do whatever we can to kind of put money back into it for future initiatives. For fiscal 19-20, and this is kind of where I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about kind of the state aid impact. So state aid obviously falls into the revenue side, so I don't want to necessarily kind of go too crazy with that. But for the most part, this year for 19-20, the district is looking to have a state aid cut of just over $62,000. So just to kind of talk on that a little bit, and I know that we're going to have some resources available probably on our website over the next couple of days, kind of that the school boards has provided, not only the board, but the general public on this topic. But the basic premise is this. The district equalization aid, which is the biggest chunk of state aid, focuses on 2 things. One of them is what's considered an adequacy budget. And so this goes back to this whole idea that in the 1940s, or the most recent version of the state contract, there's a provision there that says the state is responsible for providing a thorough and efficient system of education. So what the state basically says is that there's, X number of dollars that we're going to provide as state aid to every district regardless. Then there's some coefficients that come into play based upon whether your student is second language ESL, LEP they consider it, special services, at risk, so free and reduced. So at that point they take those coefficients and they add a couple of dollars to it. So all that said, it comes up with one big pot for your district that says, okay, this is where your adequacy budget is. This is how much you should be spending to educate these students. Now, we're going to subtract out what your local community can afford. And that's considered, terminology is fair share, local fair share. What happened this year, because we were kind of, as we were going through this, and not that we were kind of overly excited that we were going to be getting a state aid increase, but we definitely anticipated loss. What happened this year is that basically what the state said on the adequacy budget was to say, okay, we're going to fund every student another $566. So regardless of what district you're in, you're going to be getting another $566 per kid at least. And at that point, that comes out to probably close to $800 million. Well, if you've heard any of the kind of information that came out of Trenton about state aid increase, they basically said that state aid went up about $200,000. So if you just promise districts almost $800,000, but you're actually cutting a check for $200,000, where's the rest of the money coming from? The rest of the money comes from adjusting the coefficients on the local fair share. So basically what that did was, for districts like ours, where our evaluation might have gone up a little bit higher, they basically said, okay, we're going to give you X, we're going to take it from the other pocket, we're going to take away Y. So And so for the most part, it was one of those things that, and this is why kind of the stress for kind of fully funding the SFRA, which is the most recent funding formula, is critical, is that those coefficients that change from year to year to make the numbers work would go away. So that's kind of, my opinion on that in terms of how that kind of impacted us from a state aid standpoint. But in terms of kind of just general belief in terms of where we stand with fiscal 1920, the bottom line is that, any kind of initiatives that the administration is kind of proposing tries to minimize as much as possible the impact in the classroom, because that's obviously our core goal. In terms of planning ahead beyond 1920, once again, the part about kind of state aid is going to be fresh in our mind. Other things to kind of keep in mind is, like I said, we have negotiations going on right now with the administrator group. Benefits, right now, I think the trend is working a little bit in our favor with some of the benefits changes that we made with reference to teachers union contract. But it's kind of a short window of time for us to really gauge that, but I think we're heading in the right direction. In terms of other kind of efficiencies, we're going to continue to look at everything. Anything that we can do to kind of minimize the impact of the classroom, that's the number one goal. So in terms of beyond 1920, I think that's kind of what we have as our targets. In terms of resources, strategic plan is available on the district's website. Taxpayer's Guide to Education is where I pulled those ratios from. And there's a total of 20 indicators, I believe, that you can kind of look at how we compare not only to the statewide averages, but also our K-12 3,500 subgroup. And then user-friendly budgets, just to kind of provide some perspective of where we've been over the last few years, are available on our website as well. The state also has the user-friendly budget repository that you can pull at any time as well. So just to kind of wrap it up, so we kind of talked about kind of where the dollars are going in terms of the budget composition, the process that we took to get there, a more detailed kind of appropriation listing, and then obviously planning ahead in terms of what we expect for the future. So at this point, I'll turn it all over to Ms. Friedman in case the board has any questions.
Anybody, anybody from the board have any questions, thoughts, feelings? Let's see.
Good. So let's move on. Thank you.
So moving on now to the president's report. I want to sort of piggyback on the presentation that you just heard. It was disheartening, to say the least, that this district would have lost any money, whether it be $62,000 or less, given that we've been underfunded for as long as we have. That being said, I think it's important for the community to know that thankfully we have a team here that does not plan ahead of themselves and ahead of a budget, so that we're able to take a blow like that without losing staff, without losing the education and the quality of education we're giving to our kids. And I truly thank the team, Mr. Ferreira and Dr. Micah, for really being able to figure this out in a way where we're not losing the quality of education or taking any steps back, that we've been able to progress, and to Ms. Perez, Mr. Vomitia, for being able to keep the curriculum as high-end as it is. To that end, I think it's also important for the community to know that the board here is not taking this lightly, nor are we just going to sit down and let it happen. We have, Ms. Esposito and myself have set up a meeting with Senator Scanlon. He is one of our legislative representatives, and we have set a meeting for him later this month where we will advocate as best we can, not only for the money that we've lost, but the money we feel we're entitled to. In saying that, Senator Sweeney is presenting tonight, Monmouth University, on a path progress forward. Part of that deals with reworking the special education formula, funding formula. That's something I'd like to see our district be able to get ahead of, maybe be a part of, trying to frame that work. And so again, we don't intend on taking this sitting down and just letting it happen. You do have some very strong advocates that are intending on working forward to that goal. I also had a meeting with both mayors from both towns. Although at the time we did not know, I don't believe that we were going to be cut. I have assurances from both mayors that they're going to do whatever they can to support the district and the steps we're taking to really form a great community for both towns. And I hope that that continues forward. In saying that, later tonight when we go through policy, we're going to address the transportation policy, so we are able to make some positive changes there. And I think that that's important, that that be acknowledged. It won't be the answer to everybody's prayer, but it's something that we can definitely take some positive steps on. On other sort of just more lighthearted news, I had the opportunity to go to the youth cheer group over at the high school this weekend. There are future Huskies, the cheerleaders who went to nationals. That was great. My understanding is they've now doubled in their size, which is amazing. They also, I believe, took first place in a competition they were at, I want to say Cape May, might have been Atlantic City. So they did great there. And we also hosted our winter guard competition, where we're not eligible for an award because we host, but I was able to watch the JV team, and it was fabulous. It's amazing to see the staff that's involved, the parents that are involved, and the work and effort those kids put in was huge. So with that being said, I think that that's all I have. So I would say, Mr. Bombardier, this goes to you for review and printing.
Good evening. For curriculum instruction, beginning with Part A, travel, we have one staff member attending the Women's Leadership Conference. We have 2 staff members attending the MC3 Reading Specialist Consortium at no cost. 1 staff member attending the NJASA Makeup Workshop at no cost. 5 staff members attending the American Debate League Monmouth County Information Session, and that will be to get information about starting a debate process and debate program at our elementary and secondary level, and that is at no cost. 1 staff member attending the Regional PG Workshop. 1 staff member attending the New Jersey Performing Arts Workshop. 5 ESL teachers attending the MC3 ESL K-12 articulation at no cost. 1 CST member attending the Good Grief Workshop, creating an empathetic environment. 2 staff members attending the Ortho Gillingham training, and these are revised workshop days that were previously approved in October of 2018. And 2 staff members attending the MC3 Gifted and Talented Workshop at no cost. That's Part A, travel. Moving on to Part B of the agenda, item number 1 is asking the board to approve an agreement with Hackensack Meridian Health and the American Heart Association to provide training for 9th grade students in CPR on April 10th and April 11th, 2019. The district goal that supports is indicated in the rationale, and this is provided at no cost to the district. Item number 2 is asking the board to approve the 2018-2019 New Jersey Quality Single Accountability Continuum placement results, indicating that the district has satisfied at least 80% of the weighted indicators in each of the 5 QSAC areas noted on the agenda. As a result of the QSAC monitoring process, the district has been designated as high performing. Each of the scores are indicated there. As part of this resolution, I have a brief update I'm going to provide on QSAC. So as part of the QSAC monitoring process, to put the scores that we received in context, a quick overview of NJQSAC, that is the New Jersey Quality Single Accountability Continuum. It started in 2005 and has evolved Since then, the NJQSAC looks at the specific 5 component areas: instruction and program, fiscal management, governance, operations, and personnel. And a district must satisfy at least 80% of the weighted indicators in each of those areas. NJQSAC, where that falls in a larger continuum, we have school and district reporting that is done daily. That then filters into district accountability, so how our students perform on state assessments, as well as graduation rates, absenteeism, student growth percentiles, college and career readiness indicators. That all falls under the area of QSAC. And then that filters into the school accountability, which are going to be evident on the school performance reports that are going to be released shortly. So the indicators for NJQSAC, we had a full on-site QSAC monitoring visit. This included a one-day on-site visit to review all of our documents in each of these 5 areas, and then a separate day for a facilities walkthrough in 3 of our 7 schools. So starting with INP, which is instruction and programming, the score for that is based on our students' performance on state assessments and their progress in meeting both achievement targets and growth targets. It is also comprised of our graduation rates, the analysis of our data, our curriculum to the state standard, and our policies and procedures related to tiered system of supports. And then as you can see there, fiscal, governance, operations, and personnel are each of the other 4 areas. So for INP, which are indicators 1 through 7 that make up that score that you see there, that's using our PARC data, which is now the New Jersey Student Learning Assessment. It's looking at our district score based on our total population as well as each of our subgroups. It's looking at student growth based on the student growth percentile, so how much growth have students made. So we have to look at a number in terms of meeting a threshold for proficiency, but it also looks at growth for what students have made from one year to the next. Chronic absenteeism, science achievement, and graduation. Indicator 8 in INP looks at and verifies that we have provided an analysis of our state assessments and have provided that to the board and the public. Indicators 9 through 15 verify all of our curriculum is fully aligned with the New Jersey Student Learning Standards. And indicator 16 looks at our tiered system of supports, behavior, health records, and specific elements that are related to instruction and programming. For curriculum requirements, there have been significant updates. So as part of the new QSAC process, each curriculum guide must integrate each of the key areas there as noted in A to I. You must have a curriculum for each area that meets grade level expectations. You must have accommodations in place for special ed, English language learners, students that are at risk of failure, gifted students, and students with 504 plans, assessments that are aligned to the standards, a pacing guide, core instructional materials, interdisciplinary connections, 21st century standards, technology standards, career-ready practices for each curriculum. Moving on to the other areas, fiscal management looks at that we are reporting standard operating procedures, grants, capital funds, facilities plans, annual safety plans, cash flow, fiscal, and employing a certified facilities manager. Governance is looking at our curriculum, and that curriculum is being board approved. It looks at the budget process, policies, superintendent evaluation, and administrative contracts. Operations looks at student conduct, attendance, PIB, and reporting of that data to NJ Smart. And then personnel looks at all of our staff evaluations, professional development plans, teacher-student growth objectives, attendance records, and the professional development opportunities offered to staff. So for fiscal, you can see there what was existing in place prior to this change. And if you look on the right, that's what they are emphasizing in the new QSAC model, standard operating procedures, and ensuring that buildings and grounds have a certified facilities manager. Governance, we're looking at collecting data from families at least annually to measure district communication, programs and services for English language learners, and budgeting processes that address curriculum implementation. Operations looks at our district data management system, monitoring data that's entered into our CDS system, which is our county district school-wide database, and adding school district and safety compliance measures, in addition to each of the areas on the left. And then personnel indicators, we are looking at staff evaluations, professional development, new teachers, our mentoring plan, new teacher mentoring, supervision practices, accurate and timely updates of the position control roster, and compliance for staff members, including criminal background checks, physical exams, and so forth. And that's a very brief overview of the QSAC process in each of the 5 areas. We put the scores that you see there in context. This presentation will be placed on the website. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Do you have any questions? Do I have a motion and a second to approve the curriculum agenda? I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Are there any questions or discussion on the curriculum agenda?
Ms. Freeman,
Yes, Dr.
as John alluded, as background, I've been on 104 QSAC teams, and these are damn good scores. It's a lot of work for people, and I think we ought to congratulate folks for getting that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Moving on now to special services, Ms. Perez, can you take us through that?
Sure, thank you. Good evening. Under special services, item number 1, we're asking the board to approve the following student to attend an out-of-district placement for the remainder of the 2018-19 school year. There was a change in the student's placement where we needed to change the school to ensure he was receiving appropriate services. Under item number 2, we're asking the board to approve the following tuition adjustment for the 2015-16 school year. And this is as a result of the out-of-district school undergoing an audit. Therefore, there needed to be a tuition adjustment for that year for the 2015-16 school year. That concludes special services. Thank you.
Can I have a motion and a second to approve the special services agenda?
I make a motion. I'll second.
Are there any questions concerning the special services agenda? Seeing none, Mr. Liebman, can you take us through personnel?
Yes, good evening. We have several items that we're asking the board to take action on this evening. Item number 1 is the HID report from February 25th. Action item number 2 is the appointment of 3 staff members. 1 staff member, the assistant business administrator / assistant board secretary, 1 elementary teacher replacement position, and 1 part-time Title I literacy interventionist. Action item number 3 is 1 high school volunteer. Action item number 4, under extracurricular and hourly activities, we have 2 athletic activities, 2 head coaches, 1 high school softball, and 1 high school boys tennis. Those items are for action. Continuing on the agenda, item A, resignations and retirements. We have 4 resignations as listed. Item B, leave of absence, which begins on page 2 and continues on page 3, with staff members listed with reasons and effective dates listed. Under C1, appointments, there are no additional appointments at this time. Item number 2, mentors, no mentors listed. Item 3, no extracurricular or hourly activities outside of what's being asked for action. No additional college student observers. Under item number 5, 1 substitute transportation for the 2018-2019 school year. Item number 6, home instruction for the 2018-2019 school year. There are 5 students listed. This begins on page 4 and continues on page 5. Item number 7, under curriculum and instruction, there are 2 staff members listed on page 5 for additional Title I work. This continues on page 6. There are 3 staff members listed for Title I academic assistance additional hours. Item number 8, we have nurses listed for coverage for the high school prom, semi-formal, and graduation. Item number 9, chaperones for middle school graduation ceremony. Item number 10 is the spring musical for 2019. This is to pay the pit musicians. Item number 11, summer theater for 2018-2019 is a placeholder at the moment. Which that means soon. Item number 12, 2 additional volunteers for high school sports. Item number 13, staff rate changes for the 18-19 school year. We have 1 staff member reflecting a column change, and we have 1 staff member who we are moving into an elementary teacher replacement position. Item number 14, other, we have 1 employee on administrative leave with pay. And item B, we will have the board the summer recommendations for ESY, which will be an additional personnel attachment. That concludes the personnel agenda.
Can I have a motion and a second to accept the personnel agenda?
A motion. I'll second.
Any questions, comments on the personnel
Ms.
agenda?
Freeman,
Yes, sir.
I promise this is the last time tonight. I'm not giving you a personal resume here, but I was on numerous monitoring organizations of one kind or another over 20 years at the BOE. And at one point, Patty was working for me. I think you could interpret that as my supervising her, which I think makes me to recuse myself from voting on her. But if I can do like a public television nom-ad, I think she's terrific. She'd be a great asset to us, and don't interpret anything I'm remotely thinking as being negative about her. She's really good people, but I don't think I can vote for her. Okay? That's it for tonight. See you all tomorrow.
Are there any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I think now we're on to policy again. Take it away, Mr. Rubin.
Okay. Policy, we are asking that the Board of Education consider for a first reading the first set of policies. This is policy 2431.30, policy 4219, policy and regulation 5330.04, policy 5756, policy and regulation 7440. These are all additional language changes that came out from a Strauss Esme alert. Then item number 2, we're asking the board to consider policy 8600, transportation policy, for first reading. That concludes the policy agenda.
Can I have a motion and a second to accept the policy agenda?
A motion. A second.
In terms of comments, I'm going to start us off. There is available some copies of the policy. I see many people from the Transportation Committee here. So I just wanted to highlight some of the things that have been changed and some comments that I've gotten from some members of the committee as well as others, as just so that the board and I all have the same knowledge, same brain. In regards to this policy, the outcome is going to be that we are able to put more kids on the bus at no cost to those kids who will be on the bus. There is, however, still likely going to be a subscription busing. Not everybody is going to have a paid-for seat, but ideally we will be able to get some routes out so that everybody can get a seat on the bus. So this won't get rid of the need for subscription busing, but it does expand what we call courtesy busing. What it used to be was the state set distances for certain grade levels that were deemed non-mandated busing. So 2.5 miles from the high school, the district didn't have to give you busing. To account for the uniqueness of our communities, as well as feedback from the public over the years since I've been on the board, about 1.5 years ago, not to go backwards, we decided that this policy should be revisited and it should be specific to our community so that parents get answers as to why they have a seat or why they don't. So to that end, I know, and I see Ms. Reedy here, so I'm going to take her thunder a little bit so the board's aware of it.
Courtesy busing on page 2 of 10. There was a suggestion instead of "and if" the student to change it to "unless." And that's something that the board should consider mulling over as a proposed change. On page 5 of 10, item J, additional transportations for services for the purposes of providing supplemental subscription busing shall be performed by a contractor licensed by the state of New Jersey. So the intention is, if you're deemed a hazardous route by the point system, which I'm going to go through briefly, if you are deemed to be on a hazardous route, so you're within those 2.5 miles from the high school or within the 2 miles from K to 8, the district would take that up. If you are still not hazardous, you're still not entitled to courtesy busing, we're going to do our best to try and make sure that we can get some other route similar to what we did this year, where there were routes out to bid for the high school. That being said, we did revisit and were able to make some, I think, significant changes to the timelines for subscription busing, so that if everything were to go to plan as we would like it to, next year, because this would take place for the 1920 year, people would find out whether or not they have a seat on the bus before the day before school, which is a source of understandable stress for everybody. So we are trying to make those guidelines earlier because, and I think the committee once again, as well as the board for meeting as many times as we did to try and get this through so that we could do a budget including this cost. I think that that was pretty successful. Just to highlight some of the issues here. Route 35, Route 34 were assigned point values of 15 points. And that is indicative of the dangers that were implied in that were brought to light. Ideally, with some advocacy, we can have some possible alternative or extra supervision in those areas by the police departments in the towns. Ms. Reed also pointed out that the bridges were not in the point system scheme, which I think at one point they were. That might be something we want to, the board wants to address, specifically what has been sort of called the Man's Bridge over the Parkway. There's bridges on Church Street, up and down Church Street, and a few others. So those are really the highlights. I don't think that, unfortunately, we were able to make everybody happy, but I do think that we were able to make progress and get more kids on the bus at no cost to those families. We did, if you're looking at the policy, include some glossary terms, and they may not be in the policy themselves, but we're trying to make this last as long as possible, so we thought it would to just put in as much information as possible that may become an issue. Nobody who gets courtesy busing as of now will lose it, so if you've gotten courtesy busing, you're going to keep that. If you haven't, you may now be included. With that, are there any questions or comments from the board?
I just want to commend everyone, the committee that did all the work, the community members and staff members, and yourself, and also the policy committee that met and really pushed us through very quickly, probably a record if I in my time on the board. I don't think I've ever seen a policy go through, particularly like this, that quickly. So kudos to everybody for that.
Are there any other comments or questions regarding any of the policy? Seeing none, Mr. Ferrer, you are on again with finance.
Thank you. So we'll start off on page 1 of 4 of finance. There are 4 action items. This relates to the tentative budget. Tentative budget, once approved by the board, gets submitted to the county for review. And then once approved by the county, gets advertised prior to the public hearing in April. The first one is the adoption of the tentative budget, which is an action item, and it eliminates the amount broken up by fund, general fund, which is our operating fund, special revenue fund, which is grants, and debt service fund, which is the payment of debt. Number two, and this is the breakdown based upon the local taxes, local tax, the levy on both Mattawan and Aberdeen. Number three is the advertising of the tentative budget once it gets approved by the county in preparation for the April 29th public hearing. Number four is the required maximum based upon travel and professional development reimbursable expenses. The number that we've expended so far is at $21,000. The 113 often takes into consideration kind of a worst case scenario in the event that we require. So over the last couple of years, the number's always been less. It doesn't necessarily impact one way or the other, but it affects the board in the event that that number does escalate. Moving on to the items of adult require action. Number 5 for March 28th to 25th is going to be February payroll and March bills list. Number 6 would be the January transfer reports. Number 7 would be the board secretary's report for January. Number 8 is a change order for work done out of the system. There was some sub-panel work that was being done, and as a result of the referendum work, the recommendation by Mr. Nasser was that we include this as part of the search protection proposal. The majority of the money already comes out of an allowance that's built into the contract, but there is a slight change order. Number 9 is additional disposition of property, similar to last month. And number 10 is the record of drills for February. And that concludes finance.
Do I have a motion and a second to accept the finance agenda?
All motion. I'll second.
Are there any board comments on the finance agenda? Seeing none, I'm going to open it up to the public for any questions concerning agenda items.
Quinn Bond, 793 Prospect. I have some questions on the transportation policy. Now, my first question is on this points table. Are those points cumulative, or is it if there's an absence of a sidewalk for one portion of it that goes for all of it, same as crosswalks, etc.?
Okay. So the best way to explain it is you take the safest route that there is and you map it out. So there are portions, for example, of 34 that do not have sidewalks. So they get the points for 34, which would be 15, and then the points for the sidewalk added to that. Then if you live on a portion of 34 that does have a sidewalk, you wouldn't get the points for not having a sidewalk.
For me, I do care about the rest of the town, or both towns, but for me, I'm looking at it from Cliffwood Beach standpoint. My daughter has to cross 4 different streets. None of them have crosswalks. Does that become 8 points? None of those streets have sidewalks. Cliffwood Ave has a sidewalk going from the end, going along the base field side of it, but there's no other sidewalks there. There's not a crosswalk to get to that sidewalk. The only crosswalks that are actually in Cliffwood Beach are the one at Lennox and Cliffwood and going across the Wawa driveway. So there are no crosswalks anywhere in Cliffwood Beach except for those three.
So what we try to do by establishing the point value is to look at the different types of roads. So
I do understand that, but I guess one thing is there's no way possible for MAMs, if you're coming from anywhere in Cliffwood Beach, except for maybe those 1 or 2 people that are just outside for courtesy busing, there's no way to get to 22 points if you only get applied the point category once, looking at that.
So, and when you're saying...
It's a simple question.
It
I don't mean it disrespectful.
It is, but I'm trying to answer it. So you gotta, I listen to you, so now you gotta listen to my answer. So what we took into account and what studies have taken into account is there are different roads that don't have sidewalks because the traffic studies, when they were built, didn't necessitate sidewalks. For example, the little developments that Aberdeen is broken up into. Not every little development has a sidewalk. So do you get, and I'm using myself as an example, if you cross Church Street and you cross Lloyd and then you cross South Atlantic to get to Strathmore, you get the points for crossing Lloyd, you get the points for crossing Strathmore. You get the points for walking down Church Street, you get the points on the bridge. I can tell you my house still doesn't qualify for busing to and from Strathmore and Lloyd under this policy. I didn't before, I don't now. That being said, that should answer your question, but I understand,
So
not
for that-
everybody is getting busing.
Yeah, so for those 4 streets that she crosses without crosswalks, does she get 8 points or 2 points? Does she get 8 points for no sidewalks or 2 points for no sidewalks?
It depends on the speed of the road, is the short answer.
Well, but that's separate from the speed. You know, I do have an issue with the speed. I've had many discussions with Aberdeen police about the speed, because as you'll find out when you come to our neighborhood watch meeting on Thursday, Dr. Micah, you know, speeding within Cliffwood Beach, and I know it's a problem in other parts of Aberdeen and that on. The town, I can say what they told me for Aberdeen. If it's 25-mile-an-hour road, they give a grace of 10 miles an hour. So a 25-mile-an-hour road, they won't ticket until you exceed 35 miles an hour.
We can't build a policy around people
I
driving
understand that.
illegally
Yeah,
and it
I
not
do
being
understand
stopped.
that, but, you know, number one, I still haven't kind of got an answer on that. 2 points for each crosswalk, or is it 2 points in total? Still haven't quite answered that. And that should be a simple question.
I think that's something that we're evaluating, but I think that,
How
I
can
think
we
that,
vote on that in 2 weeks?
do you not want to hear the answer, or you want to keep talking? I mean, look, I'm trying to be respectful, so it is something that obviously we have to look into when doing a final version of this policy. This is the rough draft. Is it understood, as I said, that you would get credit for every hazard you run into? The answer to that question is yes. So am I answering your specific question? No, I'm not looking at it now. I'm not giving you a personal answer. I am telling you that it is my understanding you will get credit for every hazard you walk into.
Because, as I said, everybody in Cliffwood Beach faces the same issue for that. I've gone through the streets, I've checked Google Maps as well. There's those 2 crosswalks, the only other 2 crosswalks in Cliffwood Beach are at the beachfront. And they go from the parking lot to the beach. There's actually no crosswalks in front of the high school. The only crosswalk that meets federal guidelines is the crosswalk that's in the driveway. The sidewalks going across aren't actually marked sidewalks. It's not marked crosswalks, so it does not meet the legal definition.
There's a crosswalk at Church in South Atlantic.
But what about those people who live on those side streets? Those
But-
people are going
but
to
they
walk
have to
anyway,
walk-
but I'm just saying.
They would
there's-
have to
there's-
walk to the crosswalk,
Okay,
just
so you're
like
gonna walk
every,
all the way down and come back.
just like everybody else, if they're crossing the street safely. I mean, going back to Kemper, you cross at the green, not in between. Sometimes we in New Jersey drive a mile so that we can turn left, even though we just passed
I
our
do
stop.
understand that. I'm just asking in general on that. Because Madeline seems to have a few more crosswalks than Aberdeen. Aberdeen doesn't have a lot of crosswalks. There's a crosswalk coming out of Lloyd onto Cambridge, but there's not a crosswalk to cross the driveway at Lloyd running parallel to Lloyd Road. I drove past that on the way over here. There's not actually a crosswalk connecting those 2 sidewalks together to go into the driveway. Part of that is a town issue. You're not allowed to put crosswalks in without an engineering study. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions on the transportation agenda?
Hi, Kathy Empanados, 988 Sunset Way, Newport. Anything else I can say?
No.
That's it, okay. So I would like to know where this point system is based off of. Where did you find us to come up with 22 or 15? Your numbers, where did they come from?
So what the original Transportation Committee did, mostly to the work of Ms. Reed, We had the benefit of having some prior studies and transportation policies done, which I think I went over the last time from Parsippany and I think an area up in Canada that had transportation studies and guidelines given to it. Where the numbers came up, it was really started with what is it that we as a community absolutely agreed on, and that answer was that K to 5 should not be crossing 34 or 35. So,
Stop you there. As a community, are you talking about the survey that you also put in? Like, where are the results for that survey?
so I'm talking about the two surveys. I'm talking about the Transportation Committee, which was made up of mostly parents. There was one administrator, one myself as board liaison, and there was our director of transportation to answer questions. So the point system came off of starting with what is it that we all agreed on was the biggest hazard, and that was 34, 35 for that age group, assigning that the most points. What are we doing now? And putting that down into numbers. They were not arbitrarily picked from the sky.
Well, they had to have been, because where did 22 come from? So you have to meet 22 points to get busing. And that's impossible anywhere in Cliffwood. And you can't tell me that there's no point in Cliffwood Beach that is hazardous. Because there is. There has to be at least one. And no one can get to 22. I drove all around today. I studied the town. There's no way. So where did that 22 come from? Was that part of the Canada survey? The people survey?
It was just evolving through discussion between both the board committee and the regular transportation committee made up of the parents.
Can I ask the
So,
parents a question?
At one point, we started with, I think just what I did pick out of my hat, we started with 5, 10, and I think 15, something
Yeah,
to
but
that
that's
effect.
not what I'm asking. You're going around the same 5, 10, 15 numbers. I'm asking where did the 30, 30, and 22 come from? Where did those numbers come from that you have to meet to get the busing? From the study, from the parents, from the collaborative of everything? Who wrote them down?
It was a hybrid of everything.
I just don't understand who wrote the actual draft of this. Like, that's what I'm saying, Tim.
That was a conflict, I think that involved 3 or 4 different times. So I wrote a draft, the state has a
Do you
draft.
remember when you came up with the points?
We came up with points on a number of different occasions, starting with, I believe, 5, 10, and 20.
But you're still skipping what I'm saying. 5, 10, and 20 were your final numbers to get the busing, or 5, 10, and 20 for the actual hazards? Because it's not adding up to me. Everywhere you look, and also the bridges were taken off so that if the bridges were added, they would have the supply busing to over, the Parkway Bridge. But now they're not even on the survey or on this thing.
And I started saying that that's something that I had thought was on there still, so that's something that we have to revisit.
Yeah.
Again, this is the rough draft.
Okay, so the rough draft really doesn't count then, right? Is
No.
that what you're saying?
I'm saying it's a rough draft.
What studies were done to come up with these numbers besides the Canada one? Like, did you have traffic studies done, a demography study? All were promised back in 2016. Right, Alex?
I don't know that any of those have been promised. We did a demographer study, so that we've done 2 as this board. The last one, I think in 2016 or 17. So the demographer study was done. There was not a traffic study done. And in terms of, I forgot the other question, the other parts of that. It's something, like I said, that was collaborative over the last year and a half. So there was no, in fact, one of the studies that we looked at, I think it was Parsippany, had the actual parent committee going out and doing their own traffic studies.
But that can't qualify for how you're going to provide safety for our children. another district, parents, just going out in town looking. Because if I came back here and I told you all the things that I had to say about what I thought was hazardous, you'd be like, you're crazy, we're never doing that, which is why we're here. So you can't go by that. You need to get real traffic studies. This is honestly the rough draft. Like, I appreciate all the hard work everybody's put into this. And as Anissa said, these guys did it really fast. That was super great. They put it together really fast too. Because this has been going on way back before I brought this up in 2016. Now, there's so many other things I need to ask you, but I'm sure other people have questions. I would like to know what you plan on doing going forward with the studies and getting them done, and where you're going to go with the point system. And one other thing, who do we bring the point system to when we go by it?
So, just so that you're aware, which I think I had said originally when I presented the concept of the point system at the last meeting, that was the other workshop meeting about a month ago, we did also meet with representatives of both township police departments. So we did have the benefit of knowing where the risks were, where they were minimized or where they were not. So it's not something that was done without consultation of the people who know the safety records of these streets. And the officers did not find that there were any unsafe streets within the two townships. So this was, however, done also with members of our transportation board or department who actually drive these streets.
Wait, the police said there were no unsafe streets?
Correct.
At all? In all Mattapan?
In terms of
No unsafe streets for
there's-
a child at 5, 6 years old to walk.
Statistically speaking, there are no unsafe streets other than the ordinary hazards of cars, roads.
And did the police give you any information, any studies that they had available to them?
They were basing it off of their training and experience as in charge of traffic safety for both towns. I know Officer Lloyd was from Aberdeen Township. I forget who was here from.
And looking forward, so I don't think you answered all my questions, but let me just go ahead. Looking forward, if the next survey or anything goes through, are you going to try to get more surveys to make sure I don't know, give parents more information? Because I don't feel like I was given enough information when the surveys were done. Where are the studies for me to see as a parent than to go by your crazy point system? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do and I don't, to be honest with you. The surveys were put out. They were advertised. I know that they went out on Facebook. They were circulated on Facebook. So
But they weren't email blasts to anybody? So that
they
you
would
could
email
work?
blast them to every person who has a kid in the district.
I know I got the study, to fill it out, but I didn't get the results.
No, the results were not. The transportation committee had access to them, but the general public did not.
Can we have access to them, or are they?
I don't know if there are any personal identifiers, and so there is confidentiality issues that I would have to explore before answering.
Does the board get to see them?
Yes.
They do get to see them, okay. Can I come back up if I think of another question?
Sure.
Okay.
Tiffany Stevenson, 54 St. Joe Terrace, Clifford Beach. First, I just want to know approximately, or if you could give me a number, using the students that currently get busing and those who don't qualify right now, how many students will be added to the bus routes?
I don't know that I have that figure yet. Yeah, I'll let Mr. Ferrer address that.
So as part of this draft policy, I asked Ms. Kaiser to kind of run a couple of scenarios in a couple of schools. That information is going to be shared with the board probably before the end of the week. And then at that point, I think the estimation is that the Transportation Committee of the board will get together again and review that information in terms of making any adjustments. Procedurally, the first reading of the policy, like Ms. Freeman said, is kind of like your first shot at it. Doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the final version of it, obviously. But it takes this opportunity to kind of introduce, from a procedural standpoint for the board, first reading of the policy, making any adjustments as necessary for the second reading. And the second reading will be on the 20th. So I hope that answers your question.
I also would like to note that I was a member of the Transportation Committee, and I was there when we spoke to those police officers, and I honestly walked away feeling that they were absolutely no help at all, that they were there to answer our questions, but they wouldn't definitely say anything because they didn't want to, jeopardize or cause legal issues for themselves if they were to say that there was an actual hazard. So I don't think they really ever went on record saying that anything was hazard or wasn't hazardous. They kind of just played the fine political line, I'd call it. I also would like to, I'm curious as well as where the 22 points came from. I find it very interesting that 35 was a major concern, especially for those of us over at Cliffwood Beach. And it feels like the numbers were just kind of, I don't mean disrespect, and I'm not trying to make accusations, but it just seems a little interesting, the fact that no one in Cliffwood Beach is really being helped out, and that we're not getting what we deserve. I feel that many of us feel that we're kind of just like the ugly stepchild of the town and don't get the same services as everyone else, and that the numbers just were manipulated to make sure it fit into the budget the way it needed to. I don't think it's anyone's fault, especially anyone in this room, that our town, between the two towns, one was a beach community and one was an industrial factory. So the makeup of the town, where schools were placed and where people need busing now, was not really thought about when the town was created. And this is where we really do need this hazardous route, and I strongly urge the board to really reconsider and look at Cliffwood Beach in particular, because that's what's really needed. Thank you.
Just so that I think it's important that the public understand where I hold what the police officer said. I don't think there was any manipulation or agenda that the officers had. I think that the officers absolutely and always have the safety of this community in mind. They are there to make sure that our kids, that our homes are safe. And I don't think they would have contrived something if they thought that there was a safety issue as to those kids. I think that was, that is something, an important factor to address. Also, we don't know how this is going to necessarily run. And I want to be clear, the reason that this policy was done as quickly as it was to get it in so that we can account for it in the budget, to deadlines that we don't necessarily control. And it was done as quickly as it was so that we can have adequate time to give adequate notice to any parent who needs subscription busing, which was a chief complaint as well. Because parents were finding out the day before school or a week before school that they had no seat on a bus, and that's something that the board took very seriously as an address that can be, a concern that can be addressed. As I had said originally, there are other possibilities to mitigate some of the issues that I had spoken to, because 7 schools are in Aberdeen, 6 out of 7 are in Aberdeen.
A lot of that falls to Aberdeen Township, and the mayor, I think, is willing to see what can be done to try and address those safety issues and concerns. I should say, crossing 35, Mams Bridge, that's one of the reasons why we're having that meeting with Senator O'Scanlan, to get to the bottom of the Mams Bridge, who's in charge of it. It seems it's the Turnpike/Parkway Authority, which our mayors have very little power over, but maybe a state senator would. And we could finally get some movement on that. So we are also pursuing other routes. This policy, even if it were approved as it is right now at the end of March, can always be changed and addressed. There is no time limit or amount of times that we as a board can go back and fix it, whether it has to do with how it's implemented, or how it's run, or how it's affecting people. It can change however it needs to change with the lifestyles and residents of the towns, as well as any development that happens and the age of the people who are involved. So it's not something that's going to be etched in stone for the rest of its life. It is a start. I think it's a pretty good start because it will help some people. It will overall help a lot of people, at least as it comes to subscription busing and getting a quicker timeline. Are there any other questions from the public on transportation?
Shattered Reed, Madeline.
First, I want to say thank you to everyone who's helped bring this together. I appreciate all your work. I just want to know, when you created this, did you guys consider the crossing guards? Like, was that placed into this in any fashion? If you didn't think about it as of yet, would that be considered?
The crossing guards, in terms of how many and where they're located, is, I believe, mostly a township issue that's done with maybe recommendations or input from the school district, but that...
I'm sorry, I meant like, does it impact like the point system? Like, in other words, like we had discussed, if you have a crossing guard at a certain intersection, does it mitigate the, I'll say, danger or safety factor of the intersection itself? Was that considered?
So that's, and I don't want to seem wishy-washy because it was, but it also kind of wasn't. Because when it comes to 35, that does have 2 crossing guards. 35 was 15 points, and so was 34. So there aren't crossing guards at every place on 34. So yes, we did consider that. Maybe it would have been a 20-point hazard without the crossing guards. But since there are 2 crossing guards that are supposed to be there, that was factored in giving it the 15 points.
Okay, I just was asking because I didn't see it written. I don't know if it needs to be written in. It was brought up, so I just want to make sure. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bond, I see you're itching to get up.
I just have 1 or 2 follow-up questions. And you're correct, the crossing guard is an issue of the town employs them. One question I have is, this information from the proposal that you guys have out, have you provided some of that back to the towns, to the 2 police departments, so that way they can adjust crossing guards? I do know that I've spoken to Lieutenant Lloyd back when he's still sergeant for promotion and he headed up traffic. They haven't changed the crossing guard locations in Aberdeen in at least 15 years.
So, good question. I did speak to Mayor Tagliarini about it. He's going to facilitate getting a meeting with the chief of police so that we can discuss those issues to see if they need to be tweaked. I feel strong in saying that Officer Lloyd was made very aware of the concerns, specifically of the Cliffwood Beach area when he was here. And that is something that we intend on following up on, because there are certainly other things that we as a township, as a district, certainly can be taken into consideration.
My 2 other things, in regards to the surveys, if I recall correctly from the latest survey that you guys did, I guess it was like 3 months ago, 4 months ago, there's no identifying information that each of those questions were just a point value scale, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We should be able to receive some sort of summary of those point values overall.
I don't want to give you an answer that I don't know the answer
I'm
to.
not looking for that.
So it's something that we'll certainly get back to you on. Should I do it in the meeting or not?
Maybe, I'll reach out to you.
Okay, so if you have a specific question like that, I ask you to email Dr. Martha.
And then my last one's more point, in regards to the questions that she had, to those 22, 30 points, the cutoffs. I know that when we do testing or when we set up protocols for school districts, because before we do some work with different school districts, we're required to give an explanation of when we set a cutoff for somebody, when we're saying that they can return to work or not. And there has to be a backup explanation to say why a job requires somebody to be able to do 50 pounds, 25 pounds, or whatever it is for the job title. I don't understand why there's not a little bit more explicit explanation of how each of those points were derived. I understand your question, I was just making a statement that there should be some sort of commentary available to explain how you derive that, because say 5 years from now, 6 years from now, if some of the roadway issues change, when people need to go back and revisit that, if you guys don't have that commentary, there's no ability for people to understand exactly why you made those decisions this year. Yeah, and I do respect the fact that you guys are trying to push it through for the budget reasons. Yeah, the question that Mrs. Stevenson asked in regards to the percentages, if I recall correctly, when I walked in, because I got here just a little bit late, Mr. Ferrer was explaining that there's an increase in the transportation budget in expectation of additional busing. So do we have an idea, since you have a number for that increase, however temporary or tentative that number is, how many students is that increased busing for?
Can I ask you to email that, because it's a very data-specific question. I don't want to put anybody on the spot to have to answer with an exact number when it's not something that, unless you have it at your fingertips. I mean, obviously, there was thought behind it, and there's...
No, I understand this.
So if you could follow that up with an email, we'll get an answer.
I just have a statement. I just wanted to try and be helpful, Sherry Reed Madeline. To answer your question, or actually I understand, I understand your questioning of the point system, but I just want you to have awareness that there's no standard for creating a hazardous policy.
I do understand that.
Because in all the research that was done, there are no standards. Every town has to come up with their own system.
No, I do understand. As I said, one functions with the work that I do. We work with school districts. We've helped deal with the security issues in schools. We've helped deal with people returning to work, getting their jobs. So I spent a lot of time diving in through all that, so I do understand that. My commentary was that in 5 years, 10 years, many of these people will not be here on this board. You know, just because they may move, they may choose to move on to other things. If there's no documentation of how the standard was created, when people need to revisit, because Ms. Friedman said, as things change, the board has the ability to revisit policies. If you don't know how you derived the initial policy, and there's no documentation, and people aren't available to reach to ask, then that board and any members of the committee have to start fresh and rebuild the wheel again.
We did have an interesting guide that we used, a study from Parsippany. You ready to
I don't want it to start into a
No,
one,
I'm just
because
trying to be.
I understand you are.
There's no guidance on this.
Right, I certainly appreciate that. I just didn't want this to start that thing about you.
No.
Are there any other questions?
Hi, Ann Glover. I had asked multiple times for a transportation consultant. I was wondering why that was denied.
If the board has read the policy and they think that we need one, then we can see if we have the money to do one.
Okay, because we didn't come up with I was on the committee, and we didn't come up with a point system. We threw ideas up on the board, but it always got put back down to K through 5. And I feel like 6 through 8 is really being left off the list. And because I did the same thing. I evaluated Cliffwood Beach, and I'm sure there's other parts of the town that you'll never make those points. So I don't understand how we got to those points. To where, is there any address in Cliffwood Beach that would make 22 points?
And again, I'm not going to answer, and I don't expect anybody else to answer a specific question like that with an address to go on. If it's your place that you're questioning, then that's something you could submit in an email. But as you know, right now we transport most of our K to 5. In fact, almost, I don't think there's any subscription busing for those kids. So it really was a 6 to 12th grade issue with subscription busing.
Yeah.
Those are the families that are the hardest hit by our transportation shortfall. That being said, I would respectfully disagree that we actually did focus more on 6 to 12 than we did on K through 5 because that system wasn't broken. That system was not codified in Word, but that system wasn't broken. And it's looking at what we were doing as a district without it being down in Word that formed that first threshold of what would be deemed a hazardous route. That's why we have absolute hazards for those K to 5.
I understand that, but I also am looking at this, and I feel like 6 through 12 is left right where we started from.
And I think that you're probably not accurate. I think that there are a number of kids to the high school. I can think of Wilson and Texas that used to have to walk that under this would actually get busing. So I think that there were areas that were addressed. I think that's indicative by the increase. As to how many, again, if it's a specific question that you have, then I would ask that you put it in an email and we'll get you that specific answer.
And the other question I had was, why are we only charging for subscription and not hazardous and subscription to drive the cost down so that the money is allocated for everybody that is under 2 and 2.5 miles, so that the subscription people aren't paying an arm and a leg when all those children need busing and they're under the 2 and 2.5 mile distance?
I think the answer, at least my answer would be that people don't create these hazards. These hazards exist based on the makeup of the town, and that it is courtesy busing, it's not the mandated busing, whereas subscription busing, there may be a need, what you may deem as hazardous, other people don't. So the people who are falling outside of the courtesy busing may be falling outside of that courtesy busing as a result of just the way a parent chooses to bring up their child.
Well, that's not my question. My question is, why aren't they all charged? If they don't meet the state mandate, why aren't they all charged?
Because it was a choice as of now that we include them within the courtesy busing, and they're not. I don't think, given
Who made that
the
choice?
increases, right now it's at the board level.
Okay, so why couldn't we, to drive the cost down, charge that whole group that isn't mandated?
If the board would now like to start charging for courtesy busing, I suppose the board has every right to choose to do that. I think that most of the taxpayers here pay a lot of money, and that this board never looks for ways to increase that cost, and we are trying to keep the cost of subscription busing down by getting to this process easier and quicker so that we can bid out earlier and not leave it to the last minute so we're stuck with what we got.
Would we be able to find out the cost difference between what it would cost for just the subscribers and then everybody as a whole for hazardous and subscription? What the drop cost would be if you charged everybody versus just the subscription people?
I don't know if that is a calculation that,
What would be the point if we're giving now courtesy busing to people that are in hazardous zones? What would be the point of charging them when we're making a policy to do exactly that, give them courtesy busing? I don't understand how you.
Well, subscription was always charged anyway, so there was no hazardous bus policy to begin with.
But we're deciding as a board to do hazardous busing. So what would be the point of charging these people hazardous, the hazardous fruit? And if you're,
Drive the cost down for the subscription people that also be busing.
But again, I think that that's where you become more subjective versus objective. The hazardous busing, and I will say, president of this board, we don't look to find ways to charge people more money. We look every single decision we make to keep it as low as possible.
And I understand that, but everybody is trying to start busing. And I understand that you don't want to do that, but sometimes you have to do that so that it's affordable for everybody. Because we all pay taxes, whether or not we get a bus or we're mandated. We all pay taxes in the town.
But there are other choices that come into play. One is objective and one is subjective.
Well, what are
So
they?
if your seventh grader if my kid crosses 35 and I don't have a problem with it, then why should somebody else pay so that I get busing when I'm a quarter mile from the school? And I think that it's important to realize that we are trying not to raise taxes on people and that we're trying to keep the costs down and give whatever we can to the most amount of people in these communities for the cheapest price we can.
That's it
Mr. Ferrer, can you please proceed with the votes on the action items?
Yes, thank you. So we'll start off with curriculum instruction. Mr. Ager?
Abstaining on curriculum instruction, B number 2, everything else, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Britton?
Yes.
Dr. Delaney?
Yes.
Mr. Monson?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Ms. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Esposito?
Yes.
Ms. Freeman?
Yes.
Moving on to personnel action items. Mr. Ager?
Yes.
Mr. Britton?
Yes.
Dr. Delaney?
Yes, but I abstain on part 2 appointments.
Thank you. Mr. Monson?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Ms. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Esposito?
Yes.
Ms. Freeman?
Yes.
Policy, the first reading is identified by Mr. Lehman. Mr. Ager?
Yes.
Mr. Britton?
Yes.
Dr. Delaney?
Yes.
Mr. Monson?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Ms. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Esposito?
Yes.
Ms. Freeman?
Yes.
Thank you. And finance, the tentative budget items, Mr. Ager?
Yes.
Mr. Britton?
Yes.
Dr. Delaney?
Yes.
Mr. Monson?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Ms. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Esposito?
Yes.
Ms. Freeman?
Yes.
Thank you.
Does the board have any unfinished business? Any new business? Ms. Esposito?
I'm sorry, I'll make this quick. I just wanted to congratulate the school psychologist at the high school, Ms. Regano, who put in for a grant and got a new school door for the kids to learn job skills. And it was really nice to see with my fellow board members in one home in New York, watching the ribbon cutting, the kids were super excited to be able to get them off the ground. So it was a nice experience.
Okay. Are there any public comments on any additional items? Seeing none. Be it resolved that a closed session be convened for the purposes of discussing privacy matters, personnel matters, and potential updates. The subject matter of these discussions will be disclosed to the public when the reason for confidentiality subsides. Although the board cannot guarantee it, the length of executive session, 30 minutes, after which the public meeting of the board shall reconvene and proceed with business, action will take place. With that, I take a motion. Do we have a motion to go into executive
I'll make a
session?
motion.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.